And I started racing, and
James, as they used to call him, was not privileged to enjoy the comforts of life during his early childhood. This is evidenced by the loss of his mother at a tender age, which he mentioned as leaving an emptiness in him that could never be fully healed. Going to live with relatives took that feeling of abandonment one step further, but it also stirred a flame in James, the flame of fame, and wanting to leave a mark on the world. The farm life was not good for the boy as he was full of energy. He dreamt of fast cars, celebrities, and big cities illuminated at night with neon lights. Being an actor, he must have felt that something just clicked when he discovered acting. James transformed all his despair, aggression, and passion into spectacular performances. He relocated to New York City to dedicate himself to his newfound passion. Affirmatively, James was under the instructions of Lee Strasberg and other top coaches, and he was eager to learn. His potential and his ability to go for the internals were the two things I admired about him. In the auditions, one could tell that James did not have to try hard, as he was the character in his next life, and that he was genuine, that he was willing to show the world his pain. It was believable. But it did not take long before Hollywood came knocking on his door. East of Eden was his first real part in Hollywood, and this piece revealed to the movie industry what James could accomplish. As Cal, the troubled son who struggles desperately for his father's approval, James touches emotions. They became rebels without a cause and really established his fame. That red jacket, the trembling lip, the hunched shoulder, it was the embodiment of teenage rebellion and frustration. Young people worldwide identified with the energetic character James was portraying. He turned into a symbol, into a representative of all nonconformists. However, James craved companionship and direction as he portrayed these conflicted figures. James's father left his family when he was still young. He turned that pain into his art, becoming more exposed with each performance. Behind the gelled hair and the carefully cultivated air of nonchalance, he was still a kid searching for affection. Giant's final movie, James, depicts the actor entering early adulthood while addressing racism and dominance relations in the Texan oil industry. While shooting this desert masterpiece, people behind the scenes were surprised to see 24-year-old James and how he matched his talents with veteran stars like Elizabeth Taylor and Rock Hudson. The audience was increasing, and it was only natural that more significant roles would be given to him. The world would be privileged to witness his talents unfold, and his musical passion evolves as he matured into a male adult. But fate had other plans. Perhaps it was that restless desire to go faster, that thirsty desire for risk that contributed to young James's demise in the long run. A week before the premiere of Giant, he took his brand new, shiny Porsche Roadster for its last spin, causing a head-on car crash that left him with a broken neck. However, in 3 pictures, James Dean emerged as a symbol of that brief moment when America was poised in the 50s, between the repression of the past and the revolution of the 60s. He was frozen in that tension and death, becoming the embodiment of eternal youth. The farm boy who never dared to speak loudly enough. The farm boy who flew too close to the sun and shone brightly for one season on the silver screen. The world can only fathom what level his talents could have had him had he lived longer. But perhaps James Dean burned so brightly in our cultural memory precisely because his light was snuffed out too soon. Maybe he died young, but he lived forever a god on the altar of fame, adored by future generations. The search for James Dean's lost memorabilia begins. James Dean's possessions have what might be considered sacred significance to his many admirers, but his belongings became almost magical after he died at 24, as if owning them could preserve his vivacity. But some disappeared into the thin air when there was confusion after his death. As far as Dean fans are concerned, the absence of these items is like having a void that cannot be filled. But wait, if Prince Charming could not find Cinderella before the glass slipper vanished, the whole story could not have happened. However, wherever these relics are, it appears that a part of him is still with them, though not tangible. Most noticeable among those missing is the motorcycle, a 1955 Triumph Tiger 110, which Dean called Little Bastard, just like his Porsche Spider. He tailored it in detail, regarding it as one of his most valued possessions. Its disappearance triggers echoes in the hearts of fans who yearn to touch the chrome throttle grip with which Dean had a brief, intimate encounter. They think that owning it feels like making his ghost part of them or possessing them somehow. The red jacket that Dean wore in Rebel Without a Cause is equally prized. Some fans imagine him raising the collar for that perfect rebellion and style. One fan found it in a thrift shop and refers to it as their treasure in heaven, but the twin of this jacket is missing, and believers would love to zip themselves into some of the Rebel's essence. It also presents items with less expectation, such as his army surplus duffel bag and loan paperwork. In accessing these artifacts of his off-screen life, one can see the living and breathing young man behind the eternal celluloid icon. To fans, objects such as grocery receipt or light meter elicit heart-sickening yearning because they symbolize Dean's personal dreams and woes. They make him tangible. Some items were lost through negligence, while others were believed to have been stolen by obsessed fans. In recent decades, several collectors have been proven to have them in an unbelievable instance of luck. However, authentication is still not within reach for Dean devotees who hope so frantically. However, the simple idea that the real Little Bastard motorcycle might come to life again sparks rabid enthusiasm. Thus, the search goes on as every new rumor, eBay ad, or piece found in the thrift store instantly evokes desire. Dean's legions of fans still long for a touch, because for them, only his artifacts would let them, at long last, understand the essence of their eternal icon. James Dean's impact on Hollywood and youth culture. James Dean was one of the legends of 1950s Hollywood, whose popularity among the American youth could be attributed to his performance and rebellious nature. While this man's flame shone briefly, its light is still with us today. Stepping under the cape of a mysterious and brooding handsome man was a young man struggling with the same fears and identity crises many of his generation faced. Growing up an orphan after his mother's early death, Dean found solace and purpose in performing. This is why when the cameras were on, he invested much of himself into each performance, making them as passionate and genuine as possible. Dean made a lasting impact by acting in only 3 films, namely East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant. He emerged as the man of sensibility, the anguished Cal in Eden, and exhibited a capacity to elicit tenderness in the audiences. However, as the troubled teen Jim Stark in Rebel, he became a cultural icon. His leather jacket-clad Stark was a voice for the teenagers in the post-war era who had no words to connect with their parents and society. Dean's rebellion against norms was appealing to the youth who also felt out of place in the conservative America of the 1950s. While most of his contemporaries were charming, good-looking actors, Dean changed the game. He did not shy away from opening the pains and insecurities he got from his short life. He portrayed the more complex demeanor of a man that was different from the norm of invulnerable and unemotional men portrayed in the movies. For instance, the protagonist of the story, Dean, says to his friend, "How can you stay so cool when you know the next moment something's going to fall on you? I guess I'm just a real nervous kind of guy." Apart from that, Dean established rapport because he represented that struggle for self and personal voice inherent in each of us. His characters cried out, "That's who I am. Where do I belong? Am I understood?" Sadly, at the peak of Dean's talents, which were ready for the top flight of brilliance, he died in a car accident at the age of 24. His performances elevated him to the status of an icon, and his premature demise put him in the legend category. Guilt over all the opportunities lost was added to Dean's allure and the idea of getting a chance to start anew. So, however, during his brief reign, Dean was able to bend the culture at large in several ways. So there's like Brando and Newman imitated Dean's method of acting. His particular style of dressing up, which can be described as casual, became a source of inspiration for an entire generation. In fact, The Dean persona they cultivated provided the building blocks for future movie stars like Depp and DiCaprio. Even more than half a century after his death, James Dean embodies the teenage desire to find themselves and be heard. A new generation still find his work relevant because people identify with him due to his unfiltered transparency. Yet, as if preserved in aspic on the celluloid, Dean's vulnerability, teenage angst, and hunger shine as brightly as ever. His life tells a story of vulnerability in each of us, and his legend murmurs that no matter how fleetingly, we too might blaze. James Dean's impact on pop culture and the collecting world. James Dean blazed briefly, and then he was gone. He could make movie-goers and teenage girls swoon in 24 years of existence, only to end up on a lonely highway. But his fire never died out. Just like a comet that never met its destined path, Dean still remains an object of interest even to this date. Why do we continue to be fascinated by this long-dead rebel? In part, timing. Dean appeared at the right time, during the time when the voice of the American youth was being heard. Thanks to post-war economic success, teenage years are now highly liberated and financially stable compared to previous generations. At the same time, a new mass medium, television, disseminated images and ideas as effectively as never before. Into this world emerged James Dean, dark and sulky, cigarette dangling from his lips, hair perfectly ridiculous, he mumbled. He lurched. He radiated beautiful dysfunction. He was every teen's had made flesh, finally frustrated, dangerously careless, excruciatingly honest. Dean's tortured cool also reflected a burgeoning trend. The rigidity of the 1950s was already beginning to show signs of cracking. Hidden beneath the surface of smoldering discontent were the social revolutions that were yet to materialize. James Dean didn't start the fire, he just blew on the ember already burning in the heart of America. Of course, the fire goes out too soon. Dean only starred in 3 films, and he died in a car accident at the age of 24. This shocking loss left his image frozen as he was in his youth, a symbol of untamed spirit and unfulfilled dreams, a living embodiment of the lost promise of a generation. What if he had lived longer and the myth of his murder stayed alive? Or would he have become fat and outdated like his counterpart? We'll never know. We do know that James Dean rose to the status of an icon shortly after his death. He played death as he did life, the rebel in a constant state of motion, a challenge to the end. His fatal crash scene became a legend. Was his Porsche little bastard really cursed? I was a part of it stolen from the tow yard. But as the car was later dismantled, we can never know the truth. As it pertains to the wreckage, like Dean himself, both are still a mystery. Thus, as with any legend, a cult soon grew around it. Dean's knickknacks turned into sought-after items at auctions and estate sales. The well-known red jacket from Rebel Without a Cause broke and sold for $250,000. A letter in Dean's handwriting, and it was personal. Easily 5 figures. Yet, 6 decades later, fans are still clamoring for more Jim Dean memorabilia. Why this perpetual fascination? Maybe that is why James Dean is an idol and example of a dream, the sweet dream each teenager has but few are willing to chase. He resembles Peter Pan, who never had to wake up and face life's responsibilities. He remains forever suspended in this state of preeminence, musing, mysterious, waiting for the chance to rise to the occasion. They never got the chance to continue their conflict into the second scene. Ultimately, James Dean offered a prototype that never improved upon fury. Purity, gallantry, and frailty, cheek and candor blended into one. Thus, no one on earth could embody all these traits quite like him, nor ever will again. Maybe that's why we cannot stop staring at this comet that has long gone. We understand that his kind only crosses our lives once. The auction and sale of James Dean's memorabilia. Even though James Dean had only 3 films to his credit, he became the symbol of teenage rebellion and tragedy when he died at 24. Despite the brevity of his career, The mementos that he bequeathed to the world convey his spirit and rich cultural significance, providing fans with access to the personal life of a man whose life was tragically cut short. Every item taken for an auction is a small story, not just of a movie star, but of an archetypal young American man who liked racing cars, poetry, and having friends. When fans place a bid on one of Dean's personal belongings, they bid on a piece of mythic history. For instance, the red Porsche 550 Spider is infamously known as the little bastard that Dean drove off the road in 1955. Since the car that conveyed him to his sad fate, it became associated with the macabre and the supernatural, which attracted thrill seekers to its remains for years in search of answers. While it destroyed his physical shell, it could not destroy his cultural impact, which only increased since his celebrity was effectively placed on pause. There is also the dearly loved 1949 Indian Chief motorcycle that provided the young Dean with a way out of the pressure that accompanied stardom. To him, it signified freedom on the highway. Hence, owning it helps fans feel closer to comprehending Dean's essence. His other ordinary items, such as draft cards, passports, and prescriptions, also have sentimental value when considering the sudden halt on his meteoric rise. Some of the most intriguing and valuable things belong to his movies, particularly the red jacket from Rebel Without a Cause movie, which symbolizes his rebellious character. Owning it enables fans to immerse themselves in that kind of atmosphere. When a man pays hundreds of thousands of dollars to own it, he is, in fact, paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for a chance to be connected to a genius who gave voice to the youth of his generation and, in the process, encapsulated the spirit of generations to come. In a mass media culture where people today are famous for only two things, being famous or falling to a tragic death, Dean is a saint. Though he could not enjoy the success he had and died still looking for more meaning in life, his fans can, in one way or the other, give so much meaning to owning items that once belonged to him, such as the shirt he wore or the briefcase he used. They are secular artifacts charged with cultural representation and superstition. For the devoted fans, these auctions are a kind of holy grail where believers and dreamers unite. Ultimately, the market and consumption of afterlife objects like James Dean merchandise reflect the longing for continuity, identification with cultural heroes, and the search for significance in commodities connected to stardom. This is why people are willing to spend small fortunes pursuing the feeling of nearness it offers them. However, it is more than just objects. Every piece is a part of the compact narratives associated with the short yet extraordinary life of the legend. The mystery of the missing James Dean memorabilia. James was born and raised in Fairmount, Indiana, and always dreamt of making it big in Hollywood. While he was a shy, unobtrusive little boy, he had it in him to become a performer, so he headed west to find his fortune. The only remnants of his humble beginnings were a frayed leather jacket, letters to buddies in the small town, and his initial boots. While for most people, these were mere cheap flutters, to James, they were the string that connected at least two strands on the tapestry of life, the dream-chasing actor and the Midwestern boy. In Los Angeles, James was getting by with minimum wage jobs and attending auditions, gradually establishing himself. On the day he was finally signed up for his first major part, playing Jim Stark in Rebel Without a Cause, his cheeks must have been sore from grinning. Taking no time to change out of his iconic red jacket, James fully embraced the role that made him a star. He bought himself a shiny silver Porsche 550 Spider, which was his pride and joy. James would take it out on weekends, roaring down interminable miles of blacktop with the roof off, his dark hair streaming in the wind. Thus, the Porsche became a part of his private life, an opportunity to free himself from the Hollywood pressures and noise. One day, James learned about a race that would be held in Salinas, and he wanted to go and drive his Porsche along the coast of California. Unfortunately, he did not make it to the final destination. The fatal accident that claimed his life also claimed his dreams, his aspirations, and the parts he was yet to play. After James's death, one of the issues that arose was the issue of what to do with James's stuff. The torn leather jacket had the imprint of his rehearsals for the lines. Those letters still had the fragrance of his shaving and bath soap. These things had a meaning, but what? And to whom? Others were kept for display in museums or were sold at auctions to enthusiasts of the culture. But some things, the personal belongings woven throughout the 24 years of James's short life, vanished, misplaced or stolen, or just hidden in a house closet somewhere and never to be seen again. It remains unknown what happened to them. In the same way that it is hard to forget about the handsome young actor that once was, the tales of James Dean's buried treasures also linger with us. The car he was so famously associated with, the Porsche that brought him freedom and in turn death, was also gone. Despite this, there are still speculations that it was disassembled and disposed of for scrap or kept secretly. These artifacts of James's life have remained enigmatic for more than half a century, and we are left to ask, what more might they tell if they were discovered? Sneaking peeps into a tormented existence snuffed out too soon, hinting at the genius and the spirit that burned all too briefly. And as we understand, icons never die. James was once the only boy from Indiana who dreamed big, and now his memories are as light as the dust in the California desert. The impact of Dean's lost memorabilia on pop culture and collectors. James Dean's lost belongings are living a life of their own. Long gone for over 60 years, his death at 24 ensured, Dean remained an icon of eternal youth and rebellion. Consequently, collectors and fans consider his belongings, or idols, not mere shrine objects, but relics of an unachieved life, symbolizing dreams that never came true. This is why anything belonging to Dean carries a certain pathos when he is no longer around. Even objects tell us about a person who died an early death, as if like messages in the bottles that are found floating on the shores after a shipwreck. A bomber jacket symbolizes his style, a script, the parts he never auditioned for. In possessing such pieces, collectors can experience a brief contact with the lively ghost that Dean continues to be in popular culture. Furthermore, fans have never learned the ultimate destiny of such possessions as Dean's Porsche Spider, which keeps the interest going. The disappearance of objects adds an ethereal quality to them, as their return resembles coming to terms with one's fate. As a result, any artifacts related to James Dean, especially those never displayed before, have reached the skies in terms of market value. But for collectors, desire goes beyond the material. The people who buy these items to display them as memorabilia see themselves as managers and protectors of Dean's legacy. But it's touching to have souvenirs of someone put on ice when they begin their thrill of fame. The ability to own such pieces gives the buyer several moments of imaginative possession of the shortened life narrative that was his unfortunate fate. Ultimately, the most valuable goods are not the fashionable jackets, but more meaningful possessions: a book, a letter, or something like that. Objects that point to an existence beyond a public persona. Here, the romance and heartbreak that makes man and woman what they are is contained. These possessions enable one to pry into a real young man named Jimmy and ponder who Dean was, who he could have been, and who we are now that he is gone. The cultural fascination with Dean's cursed items. When James Dean passed away in 1957, he left behind more than the legacy of a great acting career that was brought to a premature end. He left behind personal effects that would turn into legends, things like clothes, automobiles, and other things that fans and collectors think to be imbued with malevolent, even voodoo-like power. In the middle of this fixation is the Porsche 550 Spider, the car Dean took for a spin the day he died. The Spider that Dean crashed was called Little Bastard. The car was wrecked and was sold for scrap after the accident. However, one calamity succeeded another. New owners who got involved in installing the car's parts were nearly killed or killed themselves. Stories were told of the car vanishing and reappearing at different times and places, and a series of bad luck befalling everyone involved. Apart from the spider, other fables arose of Dean enthusiasts and collectors falling out of misfortune after acquiring his possessions. Some stated that his jackets, glasses, or letters had a negative impact, such as causing harm. Therefore, a narrative emerged: objects associated with Dean, particularly his death, caressed evil. They became more than mere trinkets. They had become symbols of a broken promise. Why does this hold such fascination? Those who die early are immortal. They are preserved in our memory at the moment of their beauty and talent. Dean was young and talented, as was the flame of speculation about his early death. The curse yields further preoccupation with his sudden departure and the theme of the lost opportunities. This makes fans feel more, not only with the actor but also the enigma, the glamorization of death at a young age. Also, most become fans not because of the original personalities of stars, but because of the roles that those celebrities have played in the past. Dean was the teenage rebellion and alienation of the 1950s. Regarding his belongings as magical also corresponds to perceiving him as a cultural icon rather than a multifaceted individual. It gives meaning that death's randomness cannot. Of course, one can only wonder if Dean's items are actually cursed, which is doubtful. It is most likely that the impact is produced by selective perception. If we have a certain belief, we perceive and attribute extra significance to incidents we encounter. However, experience influences belief, particularly when it comes to the concept of loss when death appears to be unreasonable. Interpreting Dean's belongings as possessing an evil aura presents a way that fans can try to rationalize it all. In that light, the curse is a way to extend his immortality even further. This resonates with some religious artifacts, such as crumbs the saints believed to have left behind. Intriguingly, cars and clothes could have such an impact and feed fascination with the unseen hand of the supernatural. It is a moment that forever binds Dean and darkness together in the minds of those who recall this episode. Even if people forget all the roles that the talented star played, the cursed car crash that took his life will not be easily forgotten. Thus, it is possible to state that, although there is no indication that Dean's belongings are filled with evil forces, the story built around them speaks a lot about people. It draws focus to our necessity to seek order out of the disorder and desire to deify the departed, to envision them as having hopes, failures, and mysteries in the afterlife. That is why it also depicts the profound search for purpose, especially given that the talents here left us too soon. The ongoing search for James Dean's lost memorabilia. The search for James Dean's lost treasures has been a popular and interesting topic for collectors, historians, and fans. Even though Dean lived a very short life, his cultural significance was astronomical, making anything associated with him some of the most sought-after possessions in Hollywood. People have been looking for the legend's personal belongings and items connected to his short life and tragic death for years. At the top of almost every fan's list are items related to the Rebel Without a Cause star, including his famous leather jacket, letters in his handwriting, personal effects from his house, and parts of the Porsche 550 Spider that he drove to his doom, Little Bastard. Much of the enigma revolves around the debris of Little Bastard. After the accident that Dean met in the 24 hours of Le Mans on June 30th, 1955, the car was dismantled and some parts were sold to mechanics, collectors, and racers. Some stories were even made that the pieces were cursed, and some owners suffered from accidents, injuries, and other bad incidents. Later, the wreckage disappeared on its way to a show, and people still have no idea where it could be. There are countless theories, including theft, the individual being hidden away by someone who feared the curse. Apart from the spider, other belongings that once belonged to the Dean have also vanished in a rather mysterious manner. The disappearance of priceless souvenirs appears to have vanished into thin air, fueling rumors about their whereabouts. For instance, some of his personal belongings, such as letters and other personal items, were said to have been deposited with friends/family, but most of them are yet to be produced in the public domain. But did they get lost over time? Or are they locked up in private collections and not accessible to the fans? Nevertheless, the the search for the rest of Dean's precious goes on unabated. Collectors and fans enjoy puzzle solving when finding an item associated with them. It is common to find auction houses selling Dean items, including plain items such as scripts or notes, which fetch huge amounts. However, the most mystifying pieces remain inaccessible. But it is not just about money, money, money. Either way, the obsession is with what will make one a somebody. To many enthusiasts, it serves as a chance to come face to face with Dean and even feel the history associated with an icon who lived, shone, and went out as fast as he came. Recovering a lost object seems to be a piece of the puzzle of his short, mysterious life. Will these vanished treasures ever reemerge? Some may be lost forever, while others may be tucked away in attics or collections packed away, waiting to be found again. In the meantime, it contributes to keeping the interest in the character alive and maintains Dean's presence in mythology and/or memory. The debate over ownership. When the public once again regains interest in the lost heirlooms of James Dean, I get carried away by the philosophical issues that it triggers. To whom should the tender confidences of a soul snuffed out prematurely accrue? Is it possible for any person to claim ownership of the memory of an icon of the age? Now, this is why I can also understand those relatives who want to safeguard personal belongings from collectors and profiteers' greedy hands. To them, these items have the fingerprints of a family member who is no longer around, as if they carried the deceased soul. We must consider whether the ordinary concepts of property should triumph over the holiness and confidentiality of a soul. Still, the proponents of open access have something worthy of consideration to say. Such icons as Dean significantly influenced the mass culture and became the symbols of the dreams of an entire generation. Was it not the society that has some right to know the circumstances that molded his iconic cinematic character? Preserving access means that in the years to come, he will be able to reread and be inspired by his life. It is probably best to steer a middle course in connection with many difficult questions. The most personal property items never intended for public display should be returned to family or repositories that respect provenance. Pieces that shed light on his public service can be made more accessible if not sold in ways that would be vulgar or tasteless. Indeed, the value of any single artifact would not be a drop in the bucket compared to what Dean has contributed to the culture. What made him legendary is beyond a mere object. His fragility and passion for the artist's freedom altered cinema as a medium and art form. Instead of costumes or scripts, those close to him recall him as a man of vast kindness and devotion to friends and lovers. Here I cannot pretend to fully understand the issue at hand. But in gazing at that immortal on-screen rebel, I sense the universal, a kind of delicacy and frailty to life, a light, a flame that burned for a while and then is quenched. Maybe this riddle of ownership invites us to consider how each of us tries to live as long as that flame is in our possession. How do we handle the short time available? What stimulates others so that something eternal disappears from the sphere of death? Dean's interrupted climb created many loose ends, and one could not help but wonder about the answers to several questions. But reflecting on his artifacts brings me back to what is most important: how willingly we live through each transient moment before it is gone. The legacy of Dean's memorabilia and its enduring appeal. James Dean's possessions give the viewer a glimpse into a short but complicated life lost far too soon. These are no longer mere tokens, but have become icons of his influence, such a mesmerizing figure to this day, decades after he is gone. From the rough leather jacket to the pile of old letters, the accessories presented in the film are as mysterious and rebellious as the man for whom they were created and the actor who played the roles of such a man. When moving through museums, galleries, and private collections, every artifact has its tale to tell. Not only the story of Dean, the actor, but also the story of an eternal pop culture icon. Some items that people and collectors are fascinated with are mundane, such as motorbikes or plain lighters. By then we see echoes of a soul with the same searching and fears as many young people who emerged from the post-war generation. Other items sell for exorbitant prices at auctions, because they depict Dean in rebellious tomographic form. This is because, despite the continued production of memorabilia in the future, efforts have been made repeatedly to dissect the man from the myth and to look at Dean not just as a legend preserved in a test tube, but as a real human being. Similar to Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley, Martin Dean's life was short and tragic death at the age of 24. Possessing any item as it appears makes some of them feel closer to this mysterious celebrity. The museums have developed exhibits that strive to establish affectionate associations between the memorabilia and Dean's fans, insofar as exhibitions attempt to restore everyday objects in their environment. They attempt to reveal the suffering and creativity of a man who left his stamp on culture. They cheer for his accomplishments in filmmaking, but also want to know the real man behind the artistic work. And there are discussions about whether the most personal items should stay locked away in a closet to honor his legacy, or if they are now fair game for historians. Certain relics, such as parts of the Porsche Spider that he was driving when he crashed and died, are still the source of continuing controversies. While some claim them to be macabre souvenirs of the death of a celebrity, others view them as the symbols of the tragic fate of stardom. It is evident that James Dean's belongings, such as the books, his jacket, and the wrecked car, all have histories. They remain scattered bits and pieces with which one can pursue the identification of who he might have turned into. That is why the legend of this man continues in new generations, due to his early talent, his unconsummated life, and the objects he left with his reflection. Their value, both in monetary terms and cultural significance, will continue to be appreciated over time.